your newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, myself, Laura Matsu, and my husband, Bernhard Gunther. And on this episode, we are going to discuss how the hero's journey is different for women, and we're going to dive into Maureen Murdoch's map of the heroine's journey in order to do so. So this podcast will be valuable for both women and men because for women, it will help them understand how the hero's journey differs from the conventional male version of the hero's journey that Campbell outlined. And it will also help men understand the inner journey that many women in their life are going to undergo. And it's a journey that's often invisible or misunderstood. And it can offer insight into how they can help her with her transformation and return to wholeness. So if you've ever felt like you've been following all the rules, doing all the right things, achieving what you thought would make you happy, and yet something feels off, or if you've ever found yourself rejecting parts of your own femininity, your softness, your emotions, your intuition, just to survive and succeed in a world that seems to only value you based on what you do, then this podcast is for you. So I'm going to start with just giving a basic overview. So the hero's journey, which is a model of psychological and spiritual transformation made famous by Joseph Campbell, was never written with women in mind. And in fact, when Maureen Murdoch asked Campbell how the journey might apply differently to women, he told her, women don't need to make the journey. She is the place that people are trying to get to. So what Campbell meant is that he was referring to this archetypal role of the feminine as the goal in the hero's quest. So in mythology, this means that the hero's journey is to obtain the boon, which is symbolized by the feminine, often symbolized by the goddess, the grail, the bride in different mythology. And so in Campbell's framework, the feminine is static because she represents wisdom, intuition, love, the soul. But the feminine does not quest. The feminine is what is sought, not the one who seeks. So Murdoch found this answer inadequate for modern women who were clearly undergoing their own quest. And this quest was marked by a very different experience than what men go through in the hero's journey. It was often marked by a process of first starting with rejection of the feminine, which means they reject their mother, their body, their feelings, or intuition. That turns to identification with the masculine. So they then identify with logic, with independence, or a sense of achievement. And then this results in a loss of their own soul because they have to adapt their feminine nature to masculine-orientated systems. So this descent and return really looks nothing like the hero's journey at all. So Maureen Murdoch created the heroine's journey as a response, a psycho-spiritual journey of feminine awakening. And it is really about the quest that women go on to, in Murdoch's words, fully embrace their feminine nature, learning to value themselves as women and heal the deep wound of the feminine. And she also noted that this is a journey that seldom receives validation from the outside world. And in fact, the outer model often sabotages and interferes with this journey. So this journey is different in that it's circular. It does not fall into a linear pattern as the hero's journey might sometimes fall into, even though it's also circular. It kind of goes from point A to point B, which means that as I go through this journey, you might find yourself wrestling with a few stages at once. So not to see it in this like point A to point B, but see the different parts of the journey and how they manifest in their life. And I can tell you from going through this book, from reading this book and reflecting on my life, what she's pointing at has definitely a profound truth in it. So I'm going to give you the basic outline, and then I'll go through part 1 and part 2 of the journey and part 1 and 2 of the podcast. So the outline is this. The heroine's journey begins with a call, a search for identity. And in Murdoch's words, it occurs at no specific age, but it occurs when the old self no longer fits. So this journey could occur at a pivotal point in your life, like the moment you go off to school or take on new work, or maybe you're traveling, or maybe you're beginning an important relationship, or maybe you're ending a big relationship. For some women who are middle-aged, it could be when their kids leave home and you have an empty nest all of a sudden. Basically, this journey begins at any moment where you realize that your old self no longer fits you, and yet you don't have a new sense of self to call your own either. And in Murdoch's words, quote, the beginning stages of the journey often includes a rejection of the feminine. So this begins with a journey of women seeing the feminine side of them as weak or not productive or too emotional or inferior or dependent. And what they then do is they seek success in the world by rejecting those traits that make them feminine.
Yeah, that almost reminds me what also men project onto women, telling them you're weak, you're not productive, you're too emotional, too weak, too inferior.
Yeah.
Right? They overlay almost that belief system, which they take on.
Yeah, it's cultural.
React.
Exactly. A huge part of it is cultural. So at the same time, so they're seeking success in the world by rejecting the traits that make them feminine. And at the same time, they want to gain approval in a world that will reward them for leaning into their masculine traits. So in Murdoch's words, and I'm quoting her, they will seek to prove that they have good minds, can follow through, and are both financially and emotionally independent. They choose role models and mentors who are men or male identified women, meaning like more masculine women, who will value their intellect, their sense of purpose and ambition, and generate a sense of security, direction, and success. So everything is geared towards getting the job done, climbing the academic or corporate ladder, achieving prestige, position, financial equity, and feeling powerful in the world, end quote. So this is really supported by our materialistic society because it rewards you based on what you do, and anything else has no intrinsic value. So the heroine here, to quote Murdoch again, puts on her armor and picks up her sword and, quote, finds treasure in an advanced degree, a title, money, authority. So it's here in her journey she begins to get the approval of men. And at some point, she may feel she has it all from an external perspective. So she has the career, the kids, but she's constantly seeking, endlessly unsatisfied, and always looking for the next hurdle, the next success. So she gets obsessed with doing. And to quote Murdoch, she doesn't know how to stop or say no and feels guilty at the idea of disappointing anyone who needs her, end quote. I know a lot of women can relate to that because her need to achieve has become an addiction, basically. And it's often at this stage that a woman may experience a physical illness or accident that potentially stops her in her tracks and makes her ask, what is all of this that I'm doing for? Because in spite of all her achievements, in spite of her having everything that the world told her would make her happy, she feels empty inside. Maybe she feels lonely, betrayed. She often feels like she lost something because she has. Because when she rejected the feminine and its negative qualities, she created an imbalance within. So in Jungian terms, she is now animus possessed. She is over-identified with logic, efficiency, but at the cost of a connection to her body, her feelings, her intuition, and her own feminine nature. And she might even consciously mourn this loss. Like she might notice that there's a loss of time for family, for creative projects. She may feel a numbing of her body and emotions. And to quote Murdoch, according to Campbell, a woman is primarily concerned with fostering. She can foster a body, she can foster a civilization, she can foster a role, she can foster a community. But if she has nothing to foster, she somehow loses the sense of her function. And then Murdoch notes that many women have forgotten how to foster themselves, meaning they don't take care of their emotions, their inner life. They may realize also that their drive to succeed has been driven by someone else's goals for them. It's usually driven by a deep unconscious need to please their parents, especially the way that they have internalized their father, which I will talk about later in the podcast. And most of all, they've learned how to succeed by emulating masculine traits, but they've had to cut off parts of their feminine nature to do so. So this realization begins a process of initiation, where the woman has to descend into the underworld to retrieve the parts of herself that she's cut off. So she has to meet her grief, her rage, her dark feminine side. It can take weeks, months, years to go through this. But most of all, she needs to learn being instead of doing. And it's at this point that many people in her life may think that something is wrong with her. They may think that she's depressed or lazy, or she needs to pick herself up and get back to achieving and doing again. But this is a really important part of the process, that she needs to not hurry, because this process is the soil in which she will rebirth herself into wholeness. And in this stage of the process, this descent, there's often a desire to spend more time in nature, which represents a desire to connect to the more feminine part of herself. After this period of descent, she also has to heal what Maureen calls the mother-daughter split. This is a wound that was created because she rejected the feminine. Sometimes this involves a healing with her actual mother, or it can involve a healing with her own body, soul, feelings, intuition, creativity, sexuality, sense of humor and playfulness. And to quote Murdoch, at this point, she may take up gardening, cooking, and art class. She may want more massages. She might want to work on creative projects, enjoy the company of other women. And then it can be kind of paradoxical, because each woman has her own version of the journey. So at this point, women who were focused on a career may seek to become mothers and focus on marriage and raising children, or women who were focused on raising children may feel called to rediscover herself, her pleasures, her interest, or creativity. So how this journey manifests depends on how you spent the first part of the journey. But most of all, she has to shift her focus from this external process of doing to internal being. And this is hard for women because she may not get the same recognition and applause from the outer world at this stage. And that can feel like a type of death to her as well. So she has to focus instead of external rewards, external accolades, the rewards of her own inner journey instead. And she has to have the courage and trust she will spiritually be assisted and provided for during this process. One thing that's also important to note in this descent is for her to not give up the traits that she learned in her quest to achieve. It's not about just leaning fully into the feminine traits and then exiling the masculine and then creating a further imbalance in an opposite way, because she will then use the same skills she gained adapting to the masculine world in a different context later, but only once she retrieves her feminine side again. She can use this, for example, to bring people together or to help her community rather than just to focus on her own individual gain. So this is really the sacred marriage of the feminine and masculine of a woman who can serve not only the needs of others, but also is tuned into her own inner world as well. So in this podcast, we're going to guide you through this whole heroine's journey. Each stage, we're going to offer reflection questions. And this is not going to just be a regular passive podcast. I've designed it more like a free masterclass in the journey of feminine awakening. So in the first hour, we will cover the first 5 stages of the heroine's journey: her initial separation from the feminine, identification with masculine values, the illusion of success, the realization that it feels empty, and the pivotal moment where she begins to say no to the roles, to the systems, to the identities that once defined her. And in the second hour, we're going to enter the descent. So we're going to explore her initiation into the dark feminine, the yearning to reconnect to her body, soul, what the healing of the mother-daughter split looks like, the integration of a new inner masculine, and finally her return beyond duality, where she lives from wholeness. So she's no longer split between feminine and masculine, but she's rooted in her own soul. So since this is a podcast that's primarily for women, it's also a book that I read. I'm going to lead this podcast, and Bernhard, of course, is going to pipe in. But this focus is going to be mainly on the woman's journey. And it's not just for women. So for men who are having women who are struggling in their life, this is a really valuable thing to understand about your wife or even your daughters or any woman in your life who's going to be going through their own psycho-spiritual journey, so that you can help support and assist them.
Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to that. I already learned a lot. Some things already popped out. This approach of the heroine journey seems to be a way deeper psycho-spiritual approach and guide than what we see nowadays, because obviously the first thing that comes to mind with hyper-masculinized women, so to speak, that had rejected the feminine is ironically the feminist movement, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Number one, that was kind of the knee-jerk reaction, almost also a counter reaction because men project this weak image onto the women, and then women stood up. No, we are like you.
We're strong.
We prove you wrong, so to speak, right? And then they rejected the feminine. But you see this revival coming now over the past few years with the polarity movement, right, of more masculine men or more feminine women, the trad movement. But that seems to be still very superficial and too extreme. Like you said, it's not about rejecting the one side and then becoming just this passive woman in the kitchen and just taking care of the children.
Yes.
Right? This is you see this in the conservative trad movement, a very unbalanced, because that just delegates the masculine part again into the shadow.
Exactly.
And it will come out in very distorted ways, right?
Exactly. And you actually make that urge stronger when you exile into the shadow.
Exactly. Oh, in the polarity movement, it's not this role play, like man just trying to be more leading and the woman is trying to be more submissive in all of this, which is more personality role play. And this approach is more a very deeper psycho-spiritual inner process to recover her soul.
Yeah, and I don't know how I came across this book. I think I watched a lecture from her and I read it not realizing how profound it was going to be. But as I read it, I realized that I've been kind of struggling with this process myself. And she definitely gave words to something that was very true for my experience. I think I've been through this journey multiple times in my own life in different ways. So you can just listen to this and see how it parallels your own experience, because I feel the truth is in the actual body of work that she's offered here and in people's lived experience. Okay, so we're going to begin with stage 1, which is the separation from the feminine. So it's here that the heroine begins her journey by rejecting aspects of the feminine that she associates with weakness, limitation, or oppression. And this often stems from her relationship with her mother, societal messaging about women, or her own internalized dislikes of women. And this is where she believes that the only path to empowerment is through becoming more identified with the masculine side of her. So 1, and this may not be conscious, by the way, and I'm going to explain how this journey begins. And I see this, by the way, even in very big leaders of the conservative movement who can become a little bit animus possessed, because in order to succeed in this world, you actually you get rewarded for having masculine traits. Okay, so it begins with the rejection of the feminine. So women will internalize cultural messages that equate femininity with being inferior, passive, emotional, dependent, manipulative, or powerless. And they then exile these traits to the shadow and begin to disown them within herself and associate her worth with masculine traits instead. And this may result in devaluing other women or aspects of herself and reality that are feminine or intuitive. So a woman will trust her logic instead of her intuition. Her feelings will be inferior to her thinking, etc. And this journey begins with a separation from the mother. So the mother becomes a symbolic figure of the old order, the old way of doing things. She often embodies all the limitations of the feminine. And to quote Murdoch, she says, "A daughter may struggle with this process her whole life, some making a more dramatic break than others." And then another quote, "The separation from the personal mother is a particularly intense process because she has to separate from the one who is part of herself," end quote. So separation from the mother, biological or archetypal, is required for individuation, but it is painful and it is often experienced as a betrayal, abandonment, and she may struggle with a sense of guilt at this stage. And many women struggle to break free from the enmeshment they feel with their mother, because in breaking free from the identification with her, they have to reject their femininity in the process. And so to accomplish the separation from the mother, they have to make their mothers into the archetype of the terrible mother. So they have to see her as vengeful, possessive, devouring, and someone they must reject to survive, in Maureen's words. So this archetype of the terrible mother represents destruction, control, rage, and her actual mother may or may not have these qualities, but it's more about how she internalized her mother to create her own inner mother that she's rejecting. So the daughter has to flee this terrible mother because her jealousy and envy will try to imprison her. But in rejecting this shadow mother, the woman may also reject positive mothering and her own maternal capacities as well. So this stage, often there's a lot of projection towards negative feminine archetypes, like seeing Callie, for example, onto one's actual mother or other woman. So she begins to see the mother very negatively here.
I would argue that's mostly unconscious in most women.
For sure. Exactly. And so this leads to abandoning the mother. So to grow, many heroines must leave behind the mother's worldview and her own limitations, even if their mother was supportive. This departure often feels like she's severing a vital part of herself, because she is. And the heroine must grapple with guilt, anger, sadness. And to quote Murdoch, some very profound quotes that I've highlighted in this book, many women feel a strong desire to break away from their mother, but at the same time feel an intense guilt at surpassing her. And then another quote, many daughters distance themselves from their mothers because of their mother's inability to support her individuation and success. And then another quote, unfortunately, this is a universal theme. A mother who has been blocked from her own self-development and growth may ignore or devalue her daughter's competence, or she may do the opposite and encourage her daughter to be a special or gifted child whose success the mother will vicariously enjoy. Many mothers send contradictory and ambivalent messages to their daughters, such as, don't be like me, but be like me, or be successful, but not too successful. It is no wonder that a woman rejects the feminine in favor of the masculine, which seems to value her independence and success. So I can completely relate to that. You know, the sense of guilt, the sense of at surpassing your mother is really big. I really believe that even at this stage, some women may struggle with this and keep themselves small, and they may battle with this process of abandoning their mother. So that can be a really long ongoing process. And then also, even if you've had a good mother, even loving mothers can feel stifling if their image becomes too idealized or if they're overshadowing the daughter's individuality. And actually, she notes that it's more difficult to leave the good mother who is fun, nurturing, supportive, a positive role model, because separating from the good mother feels like leaving the Garden of Eden, a state of innocence and comfort. But the woman must still leave this Garden of Eden in order to find her own path and develop her unique voice. So regardless of whether you had a more difficult mother or a good mother, this process is still the same. You actually have to leave it behind. And then there's also the rejection of the female body. So the body becomes another way that a woman rejects her femininity, especially during puberty or when her female sexuality is met with shame or fear. There's also cultural and familial discomfort with menstruation, sensuality, which may lead women to numb, neglect, or even despise their bodies. And this rejection often marks a turn towards intellectual, rational, or achievement-oriented identification and causes her to suppress her body's wisdom and intuitive knowing. So there's a huge relationship with the woman's connection to her feminine nature and her body. Another theme that shows up is that some women did not reject the mother, but they were rejected by the mother, whether through neglect, depression, illness, addiction, or emotional absence. And then to quote Murdoch, she may then function forever as a daughter, looking for approval, love, attention, and acceptance by a mother who is incapable of giving it. She then may seek out positive female role models, perhaps older women who she can bond to. And in response, they too will often turn to the masculine for identity, approval, and power. So you can see there's a few ways that this can play out depending on your relationship with your mother, but it's all the same. And the most important part of this stage is just to reflect around the beliefs you picked up around femininity. What words come to mind when you think of the feminine? What was your mother like? And how may you've had to separate from her to become your own person? So regardless of how your mother was, the journey is the same, that there is a separation from the feminine, which begins the journey of the heroine.
So that's interesting. So regardless if you had a good mother, quote, bad mother, or a mother that was absent, it needs to be left behind in order to embrace the path of individuation.
Exactly.
And kind of separate from the archetypal mother image within, regardless even of the personal relationship to the mother.
Yeah, and you will reunite with it later because, again, this is just the beginning of the journey, right?
Yeah.
So stage 2 is identification with the masculine. So after separating from the feminine, the heroine then turns to men for power, approval, and identity. This is a survival strategy because she's in a world where success tends to be defined in masculine terms. So she embraces the hero's journey. She learns its rules, she plays the game, but it comes at the cost of her own authenticity and her internal balance of the masculine and feminine within her. And this relates to the phase which Maureen Murdoch calls daughters of the father, where many high-achieving women are father's daughters, meaning they seek validation through embodying male ideals. And the father, biological or symbolic, then becomes the model of success, logic, and rationality. These women often reject their mothers and instead will adopt their father's worldview, learning that power and acceptance comes through aligning with masculine traits. And they then organize their lives around the masculine principle, often putting other women or feminine aspects within themselves down, like denigrating their body, emotions, intuition. And to quote Murdoch, most women seek power and authority either by becoming like men or becoming liked by men. That's a big one. This is not a negative thing at first because it encouraged her to greater independence, but it becomes damaging when she believes that her only value is gained by male attention, validation, and approval. And I think that's really, really huge. And a father's support, by the way, can be positive. He can positively influence a girl's development. He can help her feel more confident, more independent, more ambitious. He can become the gateway to the external world of success and influence. However, this alliance can create internal division if the woman feels she must abandon the feminine in order to earn his favor. And I know for myself, especially if you have parents who got like divorced and were really at odds with each other, that battle is really big, where it's like, in order to become more like your father, you actually have to deny the ways that you're like your mother. And it becomes this internal battle within a woman's psyche. So the daughter seeks to embody what the father values. She absorbs masculine traits and distances herself from her feminine traits, like her vulnerability and her dependence. She may attempt to be the son he never had, a dynamic that distorts her development and splits her off from her authentic self. The heroine then will enter male-dominated arenas like academia, business, politics, etc. She will gather mentors, teachers, and allies, mostly male. She learns to speak their language, adopt their rules, and internalizes a model of strength based on control, conquest, and independence. And, you know, there's also experiences where not all heroines have a supportive father. Obviously, we live actually in a very fatherless culture in many ways. And so if this is the case, some will seek masculine validation to compensate for the loss of the father. So they will, if they had a distant, critical, or absent father figure, they will become identified with the masculine as a defense rather than conscious integration. So without a healthy masculine guide, the heroine may be more vulnerable to more toxic relationships with authority, or more will default to perfectionism. And this perfectionism is very common. It also arises as a survival strategy in women, where she has to prove that she's the best to justify her presence in male spaces. She has to learn to equate her worth with achievement and productivity, again, at the expense of her body, emotions, and intuition. And this addiction to success becomes a trap that further distances her from her femininity. So the heroine was basically learning the codes of the masculine world: discipline, linear thinking, emotional suppression, and a results-driven logic. And she's often rewarded by doing this with status, recognition, and a sense of power. But internally, it can feel hollow. So at some point, the heroine will begin to see the cracks in the system that she's devoted herself to. And she realized that success in these terms doesn't bring her deep fulfillment. It often brings burnout, disconnection, a sense of emptiness. And this awakening signals the beginning stage of the next phase of the journey. So this stage mirrors the ascent in the classical hero's journey, where the individual gains power and status by mastering the external world. It's also an important stage of the quest and not to be skipped. So as the trad wives point out, or as the trad wives prescribe, they're like, oh, just become a homemaker woman, etc. That will be fine. This is actually pointing that, no, you're skipping an important part of the journey. And why do they think you're skipping it? Why does Maureen think you're skipping a part of the journey? Because this quest enables her to find her identity and know she can survive without depending on her parents or others. And then the skills learned help her become competent in the world. So this is why it's different from this classical, oh, you just need to lean into your femininity and be a trad wife journey that a lot of people outline. Is actually, this journey is essential because it helps her find her identity. It helps her individuate, but she needs to not do it at the cost of her feminine self, which she'll integrate later. So this climb is often accompanied with a deepening inner void because she's abandoned her inner feminine to shape herself to fit into a masculine mold. And eventually the false self that she's created begins to crack, and it leads to disillusionment and the next stage, which is the road of trials. So you can just reflect on yourself, in what ways have I shaped myself to be successful in a masculine defined world? Where did I learn that my worth was tied to my achievements, my mind, my intellect, what I did in the world? So you're just reflecting on how you may have identified with the masculine at the cost of the feminine. So stage 3, the road of trials. So in this stage, the heroine has to test the masculine persona she's developed. She battles inner and outer dragons that reveal the limitations of her adopted identity. Her inner conflict intensifies, and she confronts myths about being a woman, what power means, and she also has to confront her dependencies and the fantasies which no longer serve her. So the kind of what she calls confronting ogres and dragons, Murdoch, these represent the forces that she has to conquer that represent the inner and outer barriers the heroine must face, mainly her perfectionism, her insecurities, her feeling of unworthiness, her internalized feelings of hatred towards women. And that can be unconscious. Like you could just maybe be like, oh, women are too emotional and illogical and just get angry at them. That's actually you getting angry at your own disconnection to your own feminine traits.
By the way, could this also be the case, the rejection of their own inner feminine, adjusting to a masculine world and all that, the reason or the tendency for women to be more competitive with each other,
exactly,
and catty and all of this and project, which I don't see in men's circles really that much.
Yeah, like catty, like putting other women down. Yeah. She will project that which she excels in herself. So if she sees a woman who is really emotional or really intuitive, she may be like, well, she's just woo-woo, or, she'll have all sorts of judgments about women as well. And that's actually because she has judgments towards her own feminine side. So classic shadow projection. So this stage is often filled with conflict, with disappointment. And the dragons and ogres that she has to fight are actually her own internal voices that say, you're not enough. You must do more. You don't belong. And one big realization that she has to confront on the road of trials is this realization that women have been conditioned to be dependent, either emotionally, financially, or relationally. Women are encouraged to take care of the needs of others. And this then transfers over to their work in the world and all their relationships. So women learn to anticipate other people's needs and then expect their needs will be taken care of as well. But the heroine has to realize that other people are actually not considering her needs and their relationships are imbalanced. And then she may begin to shame herself for even having needs to begin with. She may also swing towards hyper-independence at this stage. as a reaction against these feelings of dependency and vulnerability. And so this part represents a split in the psyche of the heroine. So one head is the masculine persona she's crafted, and the other head is her disowned feminine shadow. And these two are in battle with each other. So she's at war with herself. And often, as you just pointed out, this conflict appears in her relationships with other women, where she experiences jealousy, competition, or any rejection of the weakness in herself. So this conflict will experience herself, she'll experience this in her relationships with other women. And then the heroine also has to confront her own internalized beliefs during this road of trials, that women are lesser, too emotional, too soft, not rational enough. And these beliefs are absorbed from family, religion, media, education. And even if these beliefs are consciously rejected, they will operate unconsciously as an ability to not trust her, or as a lack of an ability to trust herself. So the tyrant, basically, that she has to slay is the internalized voice of the masculine-orientated world that demands perfection from her, self-sacrifice, relentless striving. It's always whispering, you need to do more, be better, don't stop, even if she's exhausted. And so she has to slay this tyrant, which is basically the death of the old self that she designed to survive in this world. Another thing she has to slay is her fantasies. And this is another part of the painful trial, which is the myth of romantic love. I think we talked about this on a podcast, romantic projections in relationship, maybe.
Yeah, in various podcasts.
Yeah. Basically, this realization that love is portrayed as a fantasy in culture. Basically, the heroine has to question the programming that says she has to be completed by someone else, meaning a partner, a job, a role. So to quote Murdoch, the unspoken message is, I won't have to figure out what I want to do. I can live his life. Which, by the way, again, like using the trad movement as a template, that's actually a popular template that the trad woman will take on. Like, oh, I don't need to figure out what I want to do. I don't need to figure out who I am. I'm just going to marry this man and I'm going to live his life. And men also will comply with this unspoken expectation by promising to complete her, to protect her from the belief she has to undergo her own journey, that he can rescue her, slay all the dragons for her. He will be her link to the world. He will take care of everything. And if a man becomes responsible for all of her worldly concerns, she won't have to take the blame for making wrong decisions. She can blame him, and she won't have to take responsibility for her own life. So the thing is it creates a shadow if a woman does this, where if things go wrong, she doesn't have to take responsibility. She can just criticize him, nitpick at him, point out things that are wrong with him. And I think that's a very common dynamic. So the heroine may have sought salvation through partnership with a man, only to realize this perpetuated her dependency and abandonment of herself. And her deeper journey is to take back responsibility for her own life, make her own decisions, earn her own autonomy. She can't make the partner responsible for her fulfillment because he will always fall far from perfection. He will not live up to them in some way, and she will project her disappointment on him for doing so. So doing this kind of thing doesn't serve the man either, because then he becomes the thing that's holding her responsibility in the world, and if he fails, she'll project on him and she'll be disappointed in him. So it's at this point she actually may feel betrayed or let down by love, and hopefully begin to understand the deeper task that she has to get to know herself and love herself. So Murdoch also draws on the myth of Psyche and Eros to illustrate that the heroine has to undertake a journey if she wants authentic relationship. So one that's rooted in mutual soul growth, not codependency. So in the myth, and I'm just summarizing in a sentence or two, Psyche undergoes this impossible task to reclaim Eros, which symbolizes the difficult inner work that's required for a woman to reconnect with the soul of love rather than the illusion of romance. So true union with a partner must be earned through conscious effort It cannot be based on projections, based on idealization or fantasy. So one of the things she has to give up is her idealization that a man will come save her, tell her what to do, protect her from the world. She has to give that up in order for true love, soul love, true union to emerge. So to summarize, the road of trials is really about her disillusionment and confrontation with reality. It's also about her stripping away her illusions about success, romance, worth. The heroine has to believe that the life she's built on masculine ideals is no longer sustainable and perhaps never was. And this stage can be filled with anger, grief, exhaustion, but it's a necessary breakdown to clear the way for a new foundation. So something you can reflect on in your own life, thinking about the inner tyrants that may still drive you. Like, where are you still driven towards perfectionism, self-criticism, over-responsibility? Where have you believed that you need to be completed by something outside of you, whether that's a relationship or a job or a role? Where do you still feel guilty for having needs? And do you still anticipate other people's needs without listening to your own body, emotions, and intuition? And this all leads us to stage 4. So this is called the illusory boon of success. And the theme is, at this stage, the heroine has achieved what the world told her would bring fulfillment: status, money, prestige, power, relationships, but it still feels hollow. So this external boon does not resolve her inner split. She begins to suspect that she has sacrificed something essential, often her body, soul, intuition, feminine nature, to get here. I've seen this like again and again in myself, in women I've worked with who feel like they're like more masculine identified, and they just feel exhausted at some point and they feel like something is missing. And I really think this connection with their feminine nature is exactly what is missing. And this leads to what Murdoch calls the superwoman mystique. So this is a woman who's applauded for doing it all. So she has the right job, the relationship, the social life, maybe the looks, the kids, the degree. So she's superwoman, but underneath she's exhausted and often emotionally barren. She may then have an obsessive need to stay busy, which keeps her from realizing that what she has achieved, while she may feel externally she's achieved everything, it's come at the expense of her soul. So sometimes this stage is marked by imposter syndrome. She often feels disconnected from what once gave her purpose. And then it's hard at this stage because society will also praise her and reinforce the illusion that she's made it, even if her inner world is in distress. And a woman has to come to terms at this point that all she has achieved may have been based on pleasing her internalized father. So this stage also is continued by a rebellion against the limiting roles of traditional femininity. The heroine has to prove that she's not just a housewife, a caretaker, a passive supporter, and she, at the same time, she may not be unsure. She may be unsure what she really is. She may also feel angry at the old role models, old models of who she was, and yet grieve their loss. And this is also leads her to being what Maureen Murdoch calls the great pretender. So she's mastered the external performance of success, but she might feel she's just really playing a role that doesn't align with her true self. So this will bring a creeping sense of either feeling detached or emotionally flat or even being a fraud. And she may continue to pretend that everything is fine, but internally she begins to feel fractured. And I've experienced this myself in my own way, where you're just kind of going through the motions, but something doesn't feel right. And even though one thing you're doing may have satisfied you at one point, it doesn't really do it anymore. So there's a lot of internal struggle at this stage. And despite achieving more than she ever has, she's now haunted by the sense of inadequacy, because she believes she must constantly do more to prove her worth. So this part of the journey drives her perfectionism, her anxiety, her burnout. She may overwork, chase more accomplishments. She may believe the next thing will finally be the thing that fulfills her. but it's like a hunger that never goes away because her deep inner needs, her soul needs, her emotional needs are not being met. And basically a woman at this stage, what really kind of stuck out to me when Murdoch was going through this is they have to have the courage to be limited, meaning not do it all. They can just do what they want to do. They have to love themselves exactly as they are, flaws and all at this stage. And Murdoch says she must say, I am not all things and I am enough. Because there's this huge myth in the world, and you even see it perpetuated by very popular influencers. It's like women have to have a job, have kids, like be beautiful. They have to do every single thing, right? And so this starts basically is really important for a woman to just acknowledge her limitations and to acknowledge she can't be all things. So like, for example, like you can't be the perfect person at work and then be the perfect mother at home. One part will imbalance the other.
That reminds me, you make a good point, especially nowadays with social media, because being an influencer is like a job nowadays, which a lot of people make a lot of income, right? Very popular, famous influencers, be it on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube, even on the conservative side. And I see some I don't want to name any names, but very popular, famous, powerful women who embody that archetype, who from the outside appearance seem to have it all. You have 2, 3, 4 kids, amazing job, good looking, fit, husband, like they have that life, but who knows what's really going on internally?
Exactly.
Because they have to go to keep that image up.
Yeah.
And also not only to keep the image up, but driven by this inner emptiness of pursuing that success in order to avoid that internal pain and needing to project that image, which then the consumers or people who follow these influencers project onto them on top of it and then compare themselves. And they're like, yes, this is what I want too. This is the perfect image of the integrated feminine. Be a mother, be an entrepreneur, be good looking, go to the gym, everything all at once.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. That's why even saying like, I'm not all the things and I am enough is really huge for women, because this stage really, to summarize, represents a disillusionment with the false self that she's built to survive and to succeed in the masculine dominated world. So everything she's fought for has now been revealed to be a mirage at this stage, meaning it may be impressive to onlookers, key point, but internally it's barren of life and soul. So the heroine has to realize that success without soul is a kind of death. And this is often when symptoms like depression, illness, anxiety, or a spiritual crisis emerge. And to not see this crisis as a failure, it's really an invitation to begin the true descent. So something you can reflect on in this stage is to think of what parts of me have I had to sacrifice in the pursuit of external success? Do I feel like I'm performing a version of myself to be praised, accepted, or validated? Where in my life have people told me I've won, but it still felt hollow? These are really deep questions that you can reflect on and journal about. And then this leads to the last stage, which is basically learning how to say no. So in this pivotal stage, the heroine begins to reject the masculine values that once defined her. She confronts feelings of betrayal to her father, to the system, to all that she's believed in. And ultimately, it's the way that she's betrayed herself. So saying no becomes an act of reclaiming who she really is. And this is not yet the full descent, but it marks a radical turning point in her journey where she stops going along with the lie. So the sense of betrayal, this is related to her realizing that the promises of success, approval, and love under masculine systems were conditioned or manipulative or false. And she may feel betrayed by mentors, institutions, religious traditions, the cultural scripts that she's bought into. And often she feels a more personal betrayal by a father, a male partner, or godfather she trusted. So at this stage, if a woman isn't oriented towards her inner world, she will project that betrayal. She will be like, oh, it's my workplace. Oh, it's my husband. Oh, it's that institution I trained with.
External blame.
She will start to blame at this stage. Yeah. And ultimately, this is a spiritual crisis. So it's important that she needs to acknowledge the ways that she feels emotionally empty. She feels spiritually disconnected. She's cut off from her soul and her true self. And Murdoch really talks about the myth of Iphigenia at this stage, who is a daughter sacrificed by her father, Agamemnon. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, to appease the gods. So this myth symbolizes the deep psychic betrayal that many women experience when they realize that they were valued only when they were obedient and useful. So the heroine may realize she was sacrificed in some way, meaning like in order to fit into the job or in order to fit into the relationship, in order to play the role, she had to sacrifice her voice, her needs, her body, and what was true for her. And at this point, she may even feel a betrayal by God. So the heroine may begin to reject the punitive, distant, and judgmental God that she was taught, often via religion or even just the way that she internalizes the world. And she begins to feel that her spirituality must reflect something different. It has to include her body, a connection to nature, a connection to her emotions, her grief and sexuality. She might yearn for a spirituality that includes the feminine aspect of nature. So the cyclical, the relational, the immanent aspect of nature. Because it's at this point that, Murdoch makes a really good point that many heroines or women were taught to be good daughters of institutions. So good daughters of religion, of academia, of medicine, of other masculine-oriented systems. So they have to see how these systems have failed them or even used them. And they have to see that the system may also deny their body, their soul, their intuition.
So interesting. So I can see where a lot of women get stuck and what feminism gets stuck into feminism, because then they just blame patriarchy.
Yeah, they'll be like the patriarchy, exactly. Yeah. And they actually have to start to embrace the dual nature of God, the masculine and the feminine aspect. So she basically also does have to say no to not only these systems, but she has to say no to certain relationships. She has to say no to make boundaries in her life. So she might also lose her status at this stage. She might lose certain relationships. She might lose certain forms of approval she was gaining. She might be called selfish, ungrateful, unstable, because this no will mark the threshold of her journey into the underworld. And to kind of summarize the whole essence of this journey, really great quote from Murdoch again. She says, "When a woman stops doing, she must learn how to simply be. Being is not a luxury, it's a discipline. The heroine must listen carefully to her true inner voice. This means silencing the other anxious voices that tell her what to do. She must be willing to hold the tension until a new form emerges. Anything less than that aborts growth, denies change, and reverses transformation. Being takes courage and demands sacrifice. For the sacrifice to be complete, women have to start saying no to the positions they don't want to fill, even if it means a loss of acclaim from the outer world. And it usually does. It also leaves a gaping hole that needs to heal before a new way is clear." So this is the most difficult part, I think, for a woman, because if you're like chasing success, gaining more promotions or more money or more outer success in the world, right? She actually has to just go against that and say no and focus on her own being rather on her own doing. So she will lose outer accolades during the stage, and it's actually necessary because Murdoch frames this as her saying no to the death of the old order. So her old ways of being, both within and without. So her old ways of doing something must die at this stage so something rooted in the feminine can be born. And this is the moment when the heroine turns away from approval from the outer systems in the world and then begins a descent inward. So this is really a stage of spiritual revolt. And it's not just a rejection of men, authority figures, but it's more a reckoning with the false gods that she's served, where she's had to perform or she's had to sacrifice herself for approval or control. And she has to become a bit more wild, a bit more dangerous, because she's reclaiming who she really is as a woman. So this mark of saying no is a crossing of a threshold from external striving to internally finding her soul and her true self. And it initiates what's called the descent into the goddess, which is the next phase of initiation. So just to reflect, closing up the first hour, to think about what you need to say no to. What are you no longer available for? What yes might your no be making space for? Because the more that we take on things that really don't resonate with our own body, feelings, and soul, the less time we have for the things that do. And then also think about what values, what roles, what relationships no longer feel aligned with your soul and might need to be let go of in order to continue this journey of descent. So if this first half of the journey resonated with you, the loss of connection with the feminine, the disillusionment with external forms of success, the power of finally saying no, then we invite you to continue to the second half of this journey, which will mark a descent into the underworld, where the heroine must reclaim her body, her soul, her feminine traits. She has to heal her mother wound and reclaim her inner masculine. And this is when the true integration begins. So for those who are new to our podcast, you can access the full episode by subscribing to the second hour on veilofreality.com/membership. And we hope to see you there.
Great. Now, I just wanted to add on, there's a few episodes from our podcast we did in the past, which work well together with this one. So if you're new to it or you want to re-listen to them, I'm going to link them in the show notes. One is about the mother wound, a full episode, and one on the father wound, how they both affect men and women. And I'll also link to a podcast on the masculine wound based on the King Arthur legends, the Holy Grail, which specifically the hero's journey of the man's integration or individuation path. So I will link to these episodes as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in the second hour.